Welcome to Season 3 of the Knack for Business podcast. Over 350 episodes strong, we're here to ignite your entrepreneurial spirit with fresh insights, networking gems, and creative strategies that elevate your game.
Question for the audience. Why are you spending most of your day on the wrong things? And how do you fix it? That's exactly what Mark will be talking about. How to help you and your team focus more on what actually matters most in your business. If you're ready to stop wasting time and start working smarter, tune into this episode and hear how time studies are helping business owners, consultants, and teams reclaim an hour a day for high impact work. Our guest today is Mark Elwood from Get More Done, an internationally recognized productivity consultant and founder of Pace Productivity. He helps organizations and their people focus on what matters most, guiding them to gain back an hour a day for top priority work using his proprietary time study system. As a strategic facilitator and trainer, he brings creativity, humor, and deep listening to every session, making planning and performance improvement practical and engaging. Mark's mission? Well, it's to give teams the tools and insights they need to get more done. He's writing poetry, practicing piano, and planning to join a band starting in November 2037. Mark, it's an absolute pleasure having you here today. Welcome, sir. And do you have a favorite quote or saying?
It's a delight to be here. A favorite quote was from Indiana Jones. And in the first movie, he was in all kinds of peril. And the woman said, Indy, what are you going to do next? He goes, I don't know. I'm just making it up as I go.
I like that one. In business, I've heard it explained that time is money. And how do people waste their money, in essence, or their time, in essence?
People talk about all the time. Oh, what a waste. We're wasting time. And a little while back, I thought, let's parse that. Let's understand what we really mean by wasted time. If you examine it in detail, you could start with the employee who is running his own business on company time. That's waste. That's stealing time. You could have employees who are not well trained. So they're spending a lot more time on an activity because they don't know how to do it properly. Maybe that employee is getting different directions in terms of what he or she is supposed to be doing. So one day it's this, another day it's that. Interestingly, what I found is one of the biggest time wasters are from others. Their boss who keeps changing directions on them, from the other department who didn't provide the right kind of information or insights the employee needs. Everybody's blaming everyone else's department. It's not the individual who might be procrastinating, but rather it's others in the organization. We have to think about how we interact with other teams. That's where some of the time waste comes from. I've measured unnecessary emails. I'm receiving all these emails, and we've measured this with the number of clients tracking their time. Email is a terrific communication tool, but it can also get abused. The average amount of time that knowledge workers were spending on unnecessary email was 3.4 hours per week. That's what they considered to be wasted time. Maybe the person sending the email didn't think it was unnecessary, but certainly the receiver did. It's that other department, other people sending these unnecessary emails that contributes to what could be called a waste of time.
I saw an article in this particular pharmaceutical firm. The person was saying they push out an email and all of a sudden they're getting an echo back. Everybody's responding to it. And they thought, well, they're losing time. And they actually put a little acronym at the top of the subject line. No need to respond. It's FYI only. That way you didn't have an echo coming back. Opinions, bring it up at the next management meeting or put it on the list, etc.
Oh, I've raised that a number of times. You send somebody something that they requested and they write back, thanks. A lot of people say, you don't need to thank me. If you're going to thank someone, say, thank you for going out of your way and staying late. That thing made a real difference, and here's the impact. Give people a reason that you're thanking them. There's a formula for doing that. But just to say thanks, a lot of people think is unnecessary. Others say, well, I wasn't sure, it got through. The consensus seemed to be leaning towards, no, you don't need to thank people. We're all polite. We're all helping each other out here. If you want to single somebody out, then you can do that in a particular way, but not just by saying thanks.
Just want to continue a bit more on the email piece. One of the things I find, especially if you're trying to go through your emails fast and you get a small window, if you don't open the entire email, you see the top maybe 5 or 6 lines. And then buried about halfway down is a critical piece of information. This is all wonderful. And then there's a but or do something else. And you totally miss it. It's happened to me so many times. This goes to the bigger picture. You also mentioned it earlier. What is the proper process so that if you're communicating, you're going to do something, you're going to host a meeting, that it becomes this.
Well, in your question was a bit of the answer. You said 5 or 6 lines, and that's halfway down. If you've got an email that's 10 or 15 lines, that's probably too long. So what's going on in there? You're probably telling stories. Okay, last week you asked me for this particular thing and you wanted it by Friday, but I was away, so I sent it to you Monday. Don't use emails to tell stories. Don't use emails to correct people. I wanted you to do this and I asked you for it by that time and you said you were going to do it, but you didn't. Look, there may be good reasons. I have the famous, his mother died. That's why they didn't get back to you. But if you're telling long stories, if you're trying to correct behavior, if you're trying to convince somebody of something, that's not a good use of email. There are formulas for convincing. When I started at Procter & Gamble, we had the one-page recommendation, and it followed a format. Here's our objective, here's our strategy, here's what we recommend, here's why. So that might make some sense, but you can do that in an attachment. Try to convince people is tough through email. Avoid those uses of email and keep it short. Can you meet tomorrow morning to go over the budget plan? I received your report and I have 3 questions about it. Don't use it for those other long reasons because you'll get caught up in writing and rewriting. If you find yourself rewriting an email to be precise and not step on someone's toes, that's the wrong medium. Pick up the phone, arrange a meeting, have a Zoom meeting, but email is probably the wrong medium for that.
So you said about 20% of time is spent on top priorities. Is there a problem gauging what a top priority is? How do you rank something to be important? Your house is on fire, get out. That's, numero uno. I get that piece. But if you have things that are roughly equal, right? I got to go to lunch, make sure the kids get off to school. If it's a household piece, to the office space, we got to plan the Christmas party, book out 4 months ahead of time. But at the same time, we got to get a report. How do you all of a sudden, they're all important.
Some people might be familiar with the so-called Eisenhower matrix. Stephen Covey talked about that, and other time management experts have. It wasn't invented by Eisenhower, but he quoted a university dean who had talked about this idea of urgent and important activities. You create a 2x2 grid with urgent and important but not urgent. What Covey was talking about was the idea of trying to focus your activities on the important but not urgent activities. And so do many other time management experts and productivity experts. But no one really defined what that was. Covey talked a little bit about relationships, but they say, spend time on your important but not urgent activities. What are those? So I thought I can take a crack at this because I've done time studies for 35 years. In advance of those time studies, we asked people 4 questions about productivity. The first is, what are the most important things you need to do in your job? If you talk to a sales rep and ask that question, they will say things like processing orders, servicing clients, filling out reports. The number one thing they will say is prospecting for new business, selling. So prospecting and selling is what they are saying is the most important task in their job. If you ask managers, it's managing and coaching. If you ask service people, it tends to be servicing customers. Those are the things that they're saying belong in that important but not urgent quadrant. Okay, so now what does the time data say? So let's match up what they say they're supposed to be doing with how they spend their time. That's what I did for those 13 major jobs. Sales reps spend about 23% of their time doing actual selling. That's contacting prospects, meeting them, or selling to them, maybe doing some marketing to them as well. So that tends to be about 23%. Other jobs, it's a little below that. Some jobs, it's above. The average is about 20%. That shouldn't be confused with people who quote the so-called Pareto principle. They talk about the 20-80 rule. It's not to be confused with, but this has been, it just coincidentally 20%. Interestingly, when I looked at men versus women, women are actually doing a better job. They're at about 22% of their time on their highest priority activities. And for men, it's only 20%. And you go, only 20%. Well, back to that sales rep as an example. They also need to be processing orders, going to sales meetings, traveling to their customers, providing service, and taking breaks. So if you add all that up, that's the other 80%, or roughly 77. So there's only 23% or so available for selling. Now they can get that higher, and some top performers do, but the average is 20. So if you're thinking about your job, chances are your highest priority activities are going to be somewhere in that 20%. And so the opportunity is, how do I increase that up to 30 or 35%?
Are you finding that as technology keeps evolving, AI is a good example, that time is becoming, for example, for this podcast, right? When we started first doing this series, I'd sit there, start reading everybody's background information, start cobbling stuff together. My expertise wasn't being a Shakespeare, so you're not going to get a soliloquy, etc. Now I'm using AI, and I'll take this information, come in, have a rough draft, process it to refine it so it's a more polished edition. It speeds up my process. Are you finding that in the workplace? AI is an example. Are there things that people can do, tools that they can capitalize on to help expedite and stay on target on the important tasks?
Let's look at the data. Let's look at the facts. When I was at Procter & Gamble, we prepared promotion plans. We had a number of areas across the country, a number of months down the year. Guess what? That looks like a spreadsheet. We were spending time in March in this region, February in that region. We prepared these plans and we had to get the numbers to add up. It was all done manually on a big sheet. If you didn't get your numbers to add up, I made a mistake. There was an error in one of those columns. Along came Excel. We could do these things and get them to add up much better. Guess what? Our boss said, can you do a version that shows 2% growth? And can you do another version with 5% growth and another with 10% growth? So we spent the same amount of time, but we did more alternatives. I don't know if our promotion plans were any better, but they certainly had prettier looking fonts. I started doing these time studies in 1990. There was no email, no internet, no smartphones. Heck, one big client said, it was a major technology initiative. It was voicemail. And that's gone by the wayside for a lot of people. I've watched different technologies come along. Sometimes I wonder if we're not just inventing more and more ways to be out of touch with each other. What I've found is that the amount of administrative time hasn't changed. For knowledge workers, it's somewhere around 25%. That's all the non-value added work, going to internal meetings, processing paperwork, and doing expense reports. So it was 25%. It's still 25%. Remember, I talked about all those unnecessary emails or different versions of doing things. There's a new one today that I've discovered. It's apps. I teach skiing part-time, and we had the parents fill out a little app to give permission for their kids to go on a special ski run. They had to find the app, download it, get an email to confirm it, set up a password. It went on and on. And you had people staring at phones for a while. We think that technology is going to help us, and it does, but just showing up, I wanted to buy a ticket for an event recently. Here's my $20. But no, you had to do all this, the motions and so on. Data is better, and we know about who signed up and so forth. But what we're finding is that administrative time hasn't changed. You mentioned AI, big new revolutionary tool. As my daughter says, and she's a computer science master's, she says, Dad, when they invented spreadsheets, all the accountants didn't go out of business. It was just a tool. AI is a nice tool, But I suspect for knowledge workers, and some of them may not be around, people who are writing things, nonetheless, for the knowledge workers that will be around 10 years from now, I expect they will still be burdened by 25% of administrative time. The smarter ones will be up in the 35%, and they will be using those technology tools better than others. The rest of the world is going to slow down by all these apps that take up time and so on. So I'm okay with technology, but I recognize it has unintended consequences and side effects that we need to be aware of as well.
You brought up something interesting as you're describing the app. Other people refer to it as friction points, even on a website. Pick a major distributor here in Canada. You can shop from home. You can look at the product, and then your next button, there's less friction than other sites. And I'm going, oh my gosh, I got to enter a password. Now I got to add this. Even the software updates some days. Do you want that now? No, I'm trying to use you now. I do the update after I'm done. I'll be fine with that. Is the consumption of time friction points a good way to define it then?
Sure, I think I'm a little bit of an expert on that. I invented an electronic device. I'm holding up the time quarter device that that invented. For those who aren't, it's small. It's about 4 by 7 inches. It's sort of a large remote control, you might say. It's got a series of letters of the alphabet. I lend that out to employees to track their time. I like to describe it as just a little less complicated to use than a doorbell. Whereas with the time quarter, you get audio, visual, and tactile feedback. You turn the on button on and press one button and it's working for you. That's it. Dead simple. We can teach people to use it in about 10 seconds. Now, the orientation sessions I have when we do these time studies go on a little bit longer because we have to explain the different activities and how long they're going to do it and so on. But it's dead simple to use one of these devices. People started it and created a device that's simple to use. We don't give instructions out with a device because we want people to attend these orientation sessions. But it's dead simple to figure out, and it's got some on-screen prompts if you press some of the function buttons. I also try to keep the function buttons down to a minimum. There's 8 of them, and that's it, plus all the letters of the alphabet. So indeed, keeping ergonomics simple for any device is what's needed. And AI is not that simple. If you say, write my wife a love poem, well, you got to give it prompts, right? Does she like cooking? Does she like tennis? And so we have to do a little bit of work to get AI working for us. I think AI does make a lot of sense. I've used it here and there to analyze some research results, to write a draft of an article, but it's just a tool. And so we humans need to use those tools wisely and not find ourselves getting too caught up in them. They'll help, but they won't go all the way.
So getting an hour back in the day, why wouldn't you want to go for all 8 hours as opposed to getting the one? I just, uh, some people want to be greedy. I want to maximize my entire day and run full bore. But it sounds like there's a bit of a balance in there that's happening. So why is 1 hour such a game changer for?
Well, you quote some of my stuff where I say we can improve your time by an hour per day for your top priority activities. There's other productivity people who say, we'll double your productivity. Well, what does that mean? Double what? If you've measured and you're spending 20% of your time, it might be 10 hours per week out of a 50-hour week. If you can get an hour extra, going from 10 hours to 15 hours, that would be, you're now up in the sort of 30 to 35% range. That's all that I think is possible because you're doing all those other things. You're going to those internal meetings, you're preparing reports, you're coaching your employees, and so on. There's a limit to how much you can improve your productivity. You can delegate by delegating to an admin assistant or a contractor. You can get more time for your top priority activities. Certainly, CEOs are really focused on maximizing their time on the things that are most important. They don't tend to be part of my database in terms of middle managers, service reps, and sales reps. They've got a balance of things to do, so there's a limit to how much more of that high priority time they can get in their day.
There's a thought, if you get a good thing, it's great. But if you get too much of a good thing, it might be actually detrimental. Would that be true of time? You get more time because time's finite. Minute's a minute. You can't make it 2
Right.
minutes out of 1 minute, but can you over optimize?
You certainly need to keep balance. I want to spend time with my family. If it's kind of low, then you want to increase that for sure. But you also need to earn an income, take care of the household, gardening, buy groceries, or whatever it might happen to be. You can integrate activities, spend your time doing with your family, doing some of those things. I just recognize that there's a bunch of things that make up our lives, and they're going to be in some kind of balance. You can change that balance a little bit, but there will always be a number of different activities that you're going to be involved with. So, indeed, try and take the wasteful ones and reduce them. And so, at home, maybe you're watching too much television. Maybe you're surfing the internet too much and finding yourself going, well, how is that time useful to me? So you can reduce that time and say, okay, how do I spend time on those top priority activities? Spending time on my job or building my business, spending time with family, or learning a hobby or volunteering. Those are high priority activities for sure.
It just occurred to me, time is, unless of course you have a watch or the clock, right? You don't know exactly how long you spent on something. Sometimes you might be doing something and it's only a minute, but it seems like an eternity. Other times, where did it go? How do you get perception of time tuned in to the task? Assuming you're not assembling components on a factory line, because you'll know the time because the timing is, what's happening around you. But if you're working on a project, you're diving deep into it, you're deep in thought, and all of a sudden you're so engrossed that you come up for air, you realize 2 hours has gone by. Like, what the, how do you help the entrepreneur, help the business understand, put boundaries around it so you don't get totally lost?
So I'm measuring how time is spent. There is literature about the perception of time when time slows down. So in some emergency, or this car crash or something, like people say, oh man, it took minutes. Well, it was just a few seconds. On the other hand, the perception of time speeding up often is related to something called flow. So you're deep involved with a project or studying or getting something to fixing something or a hobby when you're at your best, when things just click one after the other and time does fly by because you're in that sense of psychological flow. And that's good. Those are perceptions of time, which is different from the actual spending of time. If my sales rep is spending 2 hours on unnecessary paperwork, if I can reduce that, then that does allow that sales rep to spend more time on the things that matter most, the selling and servicing of clients. So we have actual spending of time and perceptions of time that can be a little bit different.
So this involves a return on investment, and the return on investment is like, do I feel good about it? So kind of an internal reward process. From a business perspective, it's then, have I increased sales? Do you find that the priorities will shift? In other words, let's say the salesperson spends that extra few minutes with the client and that reaps rewards, not only for the sale now, but for future sales or future activity. Is the time then, its weighted importance shift? Is it dynamic or is it always static?
In terms of that example you mentioned, we think, oh, did I get this thing done really fast? Did I fill out this paperwork quickly? Would be good. Whereas the example you just gave, spending time with a prospect or client times more time is good. You don't want to rush through that because you want to understand the needs of the prospect thoroughly, pick up extra information and so on. So in those cases, more time spent makes sense rather than shorter time filling paperwork. From an organizational perspective, I've recently come to a new and perhaps slightly disappointing conclusion that companies don't care, and they should. They don't care because employees are prepared to put in more time than they've contracted for. If you look at most of these knowledge work jobs, they're supposed to work around 42 and a half hours per week. But if employees end up spending 46 hours, which is what my data is saying, or they're working really long, crazy hours, some of them are getting up into the 50 or 55 range or even more, that's free time that the company's getting that they don't have to pay for. So from a corporate perspective, everybody working these long, crazy hours makes sense, except then the problem is you get burnout, there's turnover, you get decreasing quality of work if people are working late hours and not getting sleep and so on. Companies should care a little bit more or a lot more to help their employees, but a lot of them say, well, I'm getting all this free labor. So that's why there's not one of my company's franchises in every corner, is because often organizations don't care a whole lot. And it's interesting because they don't care to train people either. And I do a lot of training work. We kind of assume that people know how to sell or how to write emails or how to communicate or how to coach employees, but they don't always. And so the investment in those soft skills makes a lot of sense. And those tend to get ignored sometimes. My call out to large organizations would be invest the time in understanding your employees and training them better and understanding where their time is being spent, because then you can rejig that and get them on their top priority activities and reduce absenteeism, turnover, wasted time, and improve work-life balance. There's different measures of that as well.
If you are a manager and you're trying to maximize the yield in a good way, micromanaging is the wrong way to go. How do you train up your staff to realize, but at the same time, you have to shepherd them through a little bit till they get it? How does that structure look? How does that play out?
First, you got to devote the time to do that. One of my favorite tips for people dealing with daily to-do lists, I say, okay, what are your long-term goals? The manager has certain goals he or she wants to achieve in terms of strategic plans and so forth. It might be sales, it might be customer service standards, it might be introducing new products, it might be launching a new software system. Whatever those goals are, those tend to be long-term. And people are overwhelmed with everything they're doing today. So I say to them, start with a blank to-do list. There's nothing on it at all. And then ask yourself, if I had nothing to do today, what would I do to affect my results a month from now? Oh, I would hire that new employee, or I'd launch that sales campaign, or I'd work on that product launch and so on. So if you had nothing to do today, what would you do to affect your results a month from now? Those are your top priority activities. And that's what you got to devote time towards. Back to your question about helping along your staff. First, it's making time for that stuff. What tends to happen with a lot of managers is they're conduits of information. They're sending information down to their staff, and they're taking those reports and sending them up to senior management. Those are administrative activities, and they need to be done. But coaching, managing, and directing your employees is why you're a manager. Devote some time to that and learn about leadership skills so that you can direct people well. And there's tons of information about how to do that. It's about being clear with the employee about their goals, providing them with the right resources, coaching them along and making them accountable. You need to spend time on those activities. And once you do, those employees will deliver. But if you say, well, she doesn't have time and I don't have time, we just got to get back to what we're doing, then you've wasted that opportunity to do the things that managers should be doing, which is coaching, managing, and directing and supervising their employees. You've got to devote some time for that. It's going to be at least 20% of your time. Set that time aside and say, hey, let's meet on Friday morning and spend a half an hour on your development on this project. Set some time aside for that, and then the rest should follow.
Time for some people is depressing. If it always feels that you're running red hot and continuous, working overtime, etc., that can lead to negative consequences for the person themselves. Whether you own the business or, like, some people are workaholics. Other people, they just, they give it, and then all of a sudden, they come home at the end of the week or take a holiday, and it's like the pressure relief valve. What have you found out about burnout and overwork from your studies?
I tend to measure the people who are there, who are employed and who are working. I'm not measuring all the people who have left. Certainly the literature is full of it. And back in the 1980s, we talked a lot about stress management. I'm seeing hints and trends that stress is reemerging again, possibly because people aren't being given that proper direction, because they're running off in all sorts of different directions and ways and doing this and that, because the other departments are being inefficient back to them. So there is this sense of stress out there, compounded by the fact that work has changed. Am I working from home or am I at the office? At home, I've got kids running around and my spouse is there. I've got a tiny office in the dining room. So that's caused some grief for people. The idea was, hey, we can all work from home. We're saving some commuting time. But in terms of the resources you've got available and the tasks you're doing in your job, if saving commuting time is huge, it can be more productive because you've saved a couple of hours per day. But if you've got kids running around and pets and spouse and distractions, you're missing out on some of the elements of synergy that work so well in an office. Being able to have meetings in person and read body language, managers being able to walk around, talk to people and have confidential development meetings face to face rather than over Zoom or Teams. I did measure that and found out that ideally knowledge workers would want to be together for at least 10 hours per week. And that's about a day and a half. So equivalent of really 2 days, because nobody comes into work for half a day. So it's going to be at least 2 days. Many of my colleagues out there were predicting all kinds of trends about the future. I tended to stay away from that. Interestingly, what we are seeing is a move towards increasing the number of days in the office rather than decreasing. The good news is when your child is sick, you can work from home, or you've got a contractor coming or a doctor's appointment. So we've allowed everybody that opportunity to work away from the office. Nonetheless, we're seeing those trends moving more towards in-office work. I'm measuring the work wherever it's getting done. And there were a lot of nasty software systems that were measuring people. And often people said, well, it doesn't really matter how much time you spend working. Sure, we're interested in getting results. If you're spending 3 hours per week filling out redundant paperwork, that's worth understanding and measuring so we can reduce that paperwork or delegate it or give it away or automate it or whatever.
From a cultural perspective, is there any particular culture or part of the world that gets this really well?
I've done time studies in about 40 different countries, and they tend to be sort of advanced industrial societies. There are other colleagues who do time use research, and they've done agrarian societies or third world countries and so on, and they've looked at time spent there, where people's primary activity is food gathering and preparation and so on. They tend to spend more time with their families. So, but to answer that broadly, I think in industrialized Western countries, we're seeing similar trends in most countries. There's some literature about France and some Romance countries taking afternoons off and so on. I don't have as much on that. France experimented with shorter work week a while back, but that was mandated by the government. And I think basically people don't want to be mandated. They want to decide for themselves what those work hours are going to be. In Canada, there were some laws about email after hours, and that's all kind of vague. Companies had to sort of allow people to know that they could work emails after hours. I don't think it's for governments to mandate those things. And what we end up with is most companies and organizations are somewhat similar with broad terms.
If you had advice to give to a startup business, an entrepreneur just ramping up, how would you have them structure? And what are like 3 key points that you want to say, structure yourself this way? This is a good start.
I would say first, figure out what you're really good at. What is your added value? Quick little story. Decades ago, I thought I was going to run car rallies part-time, and we did a couple. I used to be a disc jockey at the time, so we rented this place and we had to buy all the meals, and I was the disc jockey. We're going to have dancing afterwards. The lesson I learned from that is we didn't need to buy the meals or figure that out in advance. Just show up in a bar and let them sell the meals. We didn't make a markup on that, but we didn't have to reserve them all. In terms of the music, I didn't have to be the disc jockey. Let the bar do that, or wherever we ended up. I figured out, what do I need to be really good at was planning and running the car rally, which I don't do anymore, but it was a great lesson at the time. So similarly in your business, what are you best at doing? Delegate the rest. Look, I invented an electronic device. I don't know how to program electronic chips, and I don't know how to design the intricate details of how circuit boards work, but I was able to hire people to do that. So that's what I would say. Figure out what you do best. The second piece of advice is figure out what your marketing machine is. How are you going to get customers? Is it by advertising, word of mouth, or putting up posters in the coffee shop? Figure out that marketing. You're going to need to spend some time on marketing. And the third advice would be build a team. Again, some of those people are people that have other expertise than you, but maybe you've got a team of advisors as well. Don't think you're doing it all alone. Focus your time on what really matters most.
So, Mark, to help wrap us up and for our audience, do you have any books, and how do we reach you? And
So,
where do you reach? How far? I heard 40 countries at one point in time. Station.
well, I like to keep it simple. I got 5 different websites, but getmoredone.com, just like it sounds. You can reach me through that. I'm Mark Elwood, and there's a contact form there. There are articles and research reports, so you can see those. If you want no charge at all, an article on putting a priority on your time with some terrific time management tips, just write me. There's no obligation, no workshops, seminars. I'm happy to help people out. And even if you want a bit of coaching time, I'm not a coach. It's not the major part of my business, but I'm happy to spend a little bit of time with people, have some good questions. This is what I do as a volunteer. So getmoredone.com, reach me through that, and happy to help, no obligation.
Mark Elwood, I want to say thank you so much. Really good conversation today. My co-host Wayne Pratt for his continuous support, but more importantly, you, the Knack for Business listeners, because this hopefully fills a void into your space. Mark's tracked, he's proved the system, was shocked by what he found when he applied it to himself. And let him bring you that same worthiness, that same insight into your workday, into your time, and maybe get more family time out of it so you have a balanced life.
To reach the podcast hosts, email them at info@creativeinsight.com or by the website creativeinsight.com, spelled KREATIVINSIGHT.com. To reach Wayne at his email, wayne@motivateyou.ca, that is MOTIVE, the numeral A and the letter U.ca, or his website, motivateyou.ca. If you would like to be a guest on this podcast and share your knowledge, let us know. We would also appreciate your feedback on the content or format. Check the show notes for more details. For these podcasts, we like to acknowledge the support and thanks to the following people. Carl Richards from Podcast Solutions Made Simple, a renowned podcast expert. Fred Crouch, who is the Property Wizard podcaster, where Bernie is a co-host. Jovan Strika from At Hive, a co-working space that is more than just a space. Then Melanie Weber, Bernie's invaluable business partner. And Wayne Pratt from Motivate You Inc., who serves as both a coach and co-host of these podcasts. Disclaimer. Please note that the Knack for Business podcast episodes are meant solely for educational and general informational purposes. The information and opinions contained within are not intended to be professional advice on any subject matter. The thoughts, views, and opinions expressed by the participants are their own personal beliefs and do not represent the views of the podcast hosts or any affiliated organizations. It is important to note that this podcast is not a replacement for consulting with certified experts in your area who possess knowledge of your unique situation. The hosts of the podcast, along with any participants or affiliated groups, do not take responsibility for any actions taken or not taken based on the information presented in this episode. It is highly recommended that individuals seek guidance from their own personal advisors in fields such as accounting, law, or other pertinent areas prior to undertaking any actions or making decisions that may impact their financial, legal, or other aspects of life.